The knowledge I am providing is not for the theist. It is also not for the anti-theist. Those two groups right there are hostile groups that want to fight and argue about the Bible being true or false, when in all reality there's something nested in there that neither of those two groups see. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate a parallel between the Buddha and Jesus, which is going to demonstrate that they're the exact same character. Now be careful with that. I didn't say the exact same person. Neither of them existed. We're going to look at something here that's going to show that their stories are being created on a very specific template, and they're parallel to each other. The big difference is Buddha's path is you're told to follow his path. With respect to Jesus, instead of understanding his cryptic teachings, you're told to just worship him. So what happens is that I would say, people with high levels of cognition and the capacity to turn inward and have empathy would go with something like Buddhism. But most people aren't that way. Most people would not turn inward. So what do? You create the same story, make it Jesus instead, and tell people instead of turning inward, turn outward and worship the teacher. And that's what's happening with Jesus. But let's take a look at something to see that parallel first before I go on. My name is Dan Paulson. Welcome to the video. We're not learning this in school because school isn't teaching us this. We're not supposed to know this. This is up to us to find on our own. Okay. So in the story of the Buddha, there's some things leading up to it. I don't need to go into the Buddha's story. Let's keep this short. There's a point where he's getting ready to go off on his own, and here's what happens. There's a stage in his life on a template where this happens. The Buddha fasted and meditated under the Bodhi tree until he was ready. He was then tempted by Mara, but resisted the temptation. He then gathered his monks and traveled to teach. He relied on others to feed and house him. 500 years later, in a land far away, and a people who will not turn inward and reflect, but like to blame everybody else. Jesus fasted and prayed in the wilderness till ready. He was then tempted by Satan, but resisted the temptation. He gathered his disciples and traveled to teach. He relied on others to feed and house him. Do you see the parallels there? We're looking at conceptual parallels here. I get that under the Bodhi tree is not the wilderness, but what we need to understand is that both of these characters fasted and prayed, meditated, did something of that nature in a place in isolation. Then they were both faced with temptation, but resisted the temptation, and then gathered up their resources and headed off to teach. And they did so both as what you would call a mendicant monk. You don't call Jesus that, but that's exactly what, you're not doing a job. You're going around and teaching, and people are feeding you and housing you. Yeah, that's the same character right there. Now, we can also look at things like, if we interpret karma, I have people say Jesus never taught karma. Okay, karma is not a thing. Karma is an analogous term that means something more specific that we're very familiar with. Cause and effect. Karma means cause and effect. We all live through cause and effect, and that's a part of what the teaching is that we're living through our judgments, our bundle of memories, and because of the cause and effect through that, our life is continuing to unfold in that manner. So cause and effect is an incredibly important part of everybody's teaching. When you turn inward, you have to know that. Jesus doesn't teach karma, does he? He teaches the manner in which you judge others will be judged likewise, or the manner, how you meet to others, depending on which Matthew or Luke, where you get that from. The measure you meet unto others will be likewise meted unto you. That's cause and effect. Is it karma? It's cause and effect. Karma is cause and effect. They're both cause and effect. Buddha tells you to seek emptiness. Well, that's bizarre. What is emptiness? It's the bundle of memories up here. What does Jesus say? Blessed are the poor in spirit. What is a poor spirit? It's the bundle of memories up here. How much massive crap is up here that we're living through or free from? That's the deeper teaching that's in there. However, the people who will turn inward, the amount of people on this planet that have the mental capacity to step back and to say, you know what, I see what's going on. We're going on this flow. We're in cause and effect. And I am responsible in some manner for my condition in life if I take responsibility. But most people won't do that. What they will do is blame others. What do we have? Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, to a lesser degree, Mormonism. Now, the reason I say that about the Book of Mormon, It's just going to take time to go by, but these templates, these parallels, the things that I'm finding between all of the stories that exist in the Holy Bible from the works of Abraham do not appear in the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith didn't know they were there. They are replicated all throughout the Bible, not at all in the Book of Mormon. Those all turn outward at the same time. They're worshiping a teacher that was created on the template that the Buddha was on, and others as well. They're not the only two. I'm going to do another video, The Hero's Journey, Man of 1,000 Faces. Here's another parallel right in the Bible. Moses crosses the Red Sea with God's help, and then he and the Israelites spend 40 years in the desert. Jesus is baptized, water crossing. God shows up at that point in time. Here's my son whom I am well pleased. Then he spends 40 days in the wilderness. Both of them have diet restrictions. You can only eat this much manna, no more. Jesus fasting completely. There's parallels in those stories that are conceptual parallels. There's something deeper. When you see a flood story from Babylon and a flood story from Genesis, a Christian will say that proves it. An atheist will say it never happened. Somebody like me says, you know what, that's analogous for purging yourself. That's your flood. That's your experience right there. That's what's happening. And then when you understand that, you realize, okay, well then destroying the city of Jericho or Sodom and Gomorrah also represent the same things. You bring more parallels in. This template is packed in many different ways. Instead of destroying the world, you're destroying the city. But in both cases, you're destroying the perception of the mass of your city, your world. They're analogous terms. The Buddha and the Jesus, I keep calling him the Jesus. What do? You start out as Buddha. Here's how they work. You consciously become that person. The Buddha's teaching you something. You say, okay, I become the Buddha and I'm taking this path. I'm supposed to follow in his footsteps. No, I don't become the Buddha. I become somebody who follows his footsteps. Jesus, same thing, except people don't follow his footsteps. Instead, they worship him from a distance. They worship him. So they're the ones that are keeping the teaching nearby. They're the ones standing outside the narrow gate, looking outward where all the directions lead to destruction. The narrow gate up here. You must enter in alone. That is Eastern teachings nested in a religion that is meant to keep all of the people who mentally function in a way that everything that goes wrong, they continue to blame outward, the world, people. There you go. That's the way people are, so we need to control them too. We can't give them Buddhism. We're going to give them Abraham here. Meanwhile, if you could break it down, you would say, okay, Buddha tells everybody they have a Buddha nature. You've got your own Buddha nature. Buddha is enlightenment. The Buddha became enlightened. He became the Buddha when he became enlightened. So the Buddha is a nature, and everybody has a Buddha nature, and that's an enlightened nature. And when you achieve that, you are in what's called nirvana, a state of inner peace. You start out as, Siddhartha, but you become the Buddha. You start out as one thing in life unaware, but as you become aware and turn inward, now you become the enlightened one, the Buddha. When you get to Jesus, it's exactly the same thing, except when you look at it, or if you talk about it, it's considered sacrilege by the worshipers. So you start out as Jesus, but you need to become the Christ. Everybody has a Christ nature. The Christ nature and Buddha nature, exactly the same thing, different analogous verbiage. Very quickly, analogous verbiage, that just means using something encoded, cryptic. Instead of saying something to somebody like, wow, you got some crazy thoughts in your mind, you might say, oh, you got bats in your belfry. You just used analogs there instead of using the exact same words. If I'm holding on to something, God, I'm so pissed off about this from my childhood. It just makes me angry. And every time I see something like that, I'm acting out. That's that cause and effect right there that's happening based on a thought. Life is continuing to flow in that way without the resolution of this up here. And what am I doing here? The idea that maybe that anchored ship cannot sail represents the idea that I'm a ship and I'm holding on to something and I cannot sail free as a result of it. Analogous verbiage are ways of holding things. You cannot put new wine into an old wineskin. You must put new wine into a new wineskin. That's me. That's you. You cannot put new life into your old self. Otherwise, it'll ruin the new life. And you cannot put old life into a new self. Otherwise, it'll ruin both of them. what you have to do and make it worse. What you must do is put new wine, new life into a new self. Purge first, then do it. The analogous verbiage hides all of the teaching. As you become aware and turn inward, now you become the enlightened one, the Buddha. When you get to Jesus, it's exactly the same thing, except when you look at it, or if you talk about it, it's considered sacrilege by the worshipers. So you start out as Jesus, but you need to become the Christ. Everybody has a Christ nature. The Christ nature and Buddha nature, exactly the same thing, different analogous verbiage. Everybody has this pure nature. And when you achieve it, you become the Christ yourself. You go from Jesus to Christ. Siddhartha to the Buddha. Those are parallel. What else about those? So if you've, and then instead of nirvana, it's the kingdom of heaven within. And Jesus said, I'm going to return before all of you have died way back when. People are still waiting for him. That's because every time somebody understands this and turns inward and finds their Buddha nature, their Christ nature, that's the return of Christ right there. That's when Christ returns. It's metaphorical. And the person that finds their enlightened nature is not Christ. Separate from that. That's the outer carrier shell. That just means the enlightened person. Parallel it to a Buddha. However, teach it in such a way that have conversations with Christians about this. It's true, the Bible says so. Can you explain this to me? It's true, the Bible says so. Well, what about this or that? It's true, the Bible says so. You're just trying to prove me wrong. You're like, oh my God, you can't even have a discussion. Yeah, there's some incredibly cognitive deficit people that are Christians. There are other things in the world, not just Christians, but wow, yeah. Look at it. Christianity is built on a common framework. Jesus is a monomyth. We can learn that. He crossed a threshold and went into the belly of the whale. That is actually another little parallel snip. If you were to read about Jonah and the whale, you see that Jonah went into the whale, was in there for 3 days, and then was spit out onto the beach and was enlightened now. It's like, okay, now I'm ready to go. Jesus' crucifixion goes into the tomb, in there for 3 days, and when it's time to emerge, you go on, you've lifted off, you've left Earth. You've now become enlightened as well. So you see parallels at those levels. You don't understand that those are recurring motifs because they're conceptual. They're about us. I would be Jonah. That represents me going into my mind and resolving something, and then coming out and going, okay, I feel better now. I'm ready to go. Jesus, same thing. I'm going to go in there. And yeah, anyway, parallel motifs that are difficult to see because they're conceptual. That's the tricky part right there. Understanding the conceptual nature of analogous verbiage. It's layered in thought processes, but it's accessible through thought experiment. I'll do that on another video. All right, that's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Questions, comments, suggestions. If you have a question, maybe if you see a parallel from something in antiquity, and you might want to say, what do you think about this or that or something? Yeah, I'd be happy to jump on that. All right. Take care. See you in the next video.